Well, welcome to part two. Tonight's special from Good Fight Forevermore, brought to you by Straight Shooting News. I'm your host, Ed Bandana, and we're going to cover the second round of questioning of the Rand Paul hearing. Rand Paul hearing, which I believe is why we're seeing everything transpire from desperate Democrats violating the Constitution. I think we're in the middle of a lot of cover-ups. Excuse me. And there's a reason for it. If you watch segment one, you'll see many of the reasons are quite shocking, as we heard from Dr. Ebright, Dr. Quay, and Dr. Esvelt, as they brought up many concerns to the senators that were asking the questions. But let's move forward here and let's listen to Rand speak out, and I think we'll go back to Senator Johnson again with the second round of questions. Roll that.
Senator Rand Paul headed today's hearing, and he joins me now. So, Senator, what did you learn from these experts?
I know this is going to be shocking, but we learned that Dr. Fauci has been lying to us. 3 scientists agreed that this was dangerous research. 2 out of the 3 absolutely said it was gain of function. The 3rd said it was dangerous research and should have gone before a committee. When Dr. Fauci said, oh, we've reviewed this and the experts have looked at this and said it's not gain of function, even that wasn't true. There was a committee that was formed after 2017 to look at this dangerous research. They didn't look at this research at all because they never reviewed it. So no one reviewed this to say it wasn't gain of function research. They didn't review it, period. We also learned from these scientists today that the committee that is supposed to review these viruses is secret. We don't know the names, we don't know whether they ever meet, and we don't have any records of their meetings. It's top secret. Congress is not allowed to know. So whether the committee actually exists, we're uncertain. We do know that they've met 3 times, and there are thousands of gain-of-function research proposals. They've only met 3 times. They've only reviewed 3 projects. So we learned a lot of things, but I think we reconfirmed that Dr. Fauci is not being honest with us. Yes, the NIH funded gain-of-function research. Yes, it was dangerous. And yes, nobody looked over this. Nobody reviewed the research. And yes, 1 million people died. And there still seems to be a significant lack of curiosity on the part of Democrats.
What would be the fallout if it's proven, as I think you've done, that Dr. Fauci lied to Congress under oath? And what would be the implication if the whole government could admit that maybe some of this funding did go to the Wuhan lab where they got sloppy and oops, a pandemic broke out?
Obviously, there's moral culpability. There could be legal culpability for lying to Congress. But even more important than that, more important than attaching the blame to these people, and they do deserve blame, but even more important, we should try to figure out how we prevent this from happening again. All 3 of our scientists said that we need something similar to what we do for nuclear research. So if you have centrifuges at your house, Jesse, and you want to send them to Iran or to Russia, it's against the law. So all 3 of these scientists independently came up to the conclusion that we should have an independent regulatory agency and that it should be illegal to send DNA synthesizers to communist China. It should be illegal to send humanized mice to China. So we've been the leaders in this research, but we shouldn't willy-nilly be passing stuff around that can get in the hands of people who might want to create a bioterrorist weapon. So I think we learned a lot today, and this should be the beginning. Now, if we're in charge in November, I will continue these hearings, and I will try to get a Democrat on board to say, why don't we have bipartisan bill that will create better oversight for this potential pandemics?
That's a good idea, and I expect the Democrats to join you on that because no one wants this to ever happen again. Dr. Rand Paul, very important hearing. Glad you did that today.
Now, this must never happen again. That is what this is all about. Secret review committees. Congress can't get the information. We're funding all this. This can never happen again. Not try to prevent it. It can never happen again. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. that's not what's going on here. And that's what I found is designed. I mean, Rand is trying to be reasonable, and he's hoping for the best with the November elections. But like I said, we're looking at crimes against humanity and all the accomplices, and not like they're focusing on, it's just the Democrats don't want to have the hearings, but there's also members of the GOP that are involved in this too. I will guarantee it. And you'll see who they are in the next few months as it's all unwinds. But now, let's move to round two, where Ron Johnson, who's been on top of this from the beginning, and they want to remove him from the Senate. They're pumping big money into his state to remove him from office. But I don't think he will. Let's listen to more of Ron Johnson's questions in round two. Roll
Second round, and why don't we start, we'll go the same order. Senator Johnson.
Dr. Quay, how did we find out about the Nipah virus?
In December 2019, 5 patients at a Wuhan hospital had their specimens sent, a bronchial lavage, where they stick a throat and get it lost, to the One Institute of Virology for sequencing. The process is to amplify with a PCR process. You make a lot of copies of what's in the specimen, and you usually inadvertently make copies of what's going on in the laboratory. So the One Institute of Virology probably regrets, but they put a 55 million letter database of the background information up in the gene bank, which is the NIH's database there, of everything going on. We found 20 strange things in these patient specimens: honeysuckle genes, horse viruses. 19 of the things we found were in publications from the laboratory over the previous 2 years. So this clearly was a signal of what was going on in the lab around there. The one thing they didn't publish on was this cloning vectors of the Nipah virus. So it's in the patient specimens because it was in the laboratory at the time, not in the patients, but and they have never published on that at this point in time.
How do we know it's 60% lethal?
Oh, the Nipah virus has had epidemics, sporadic epidemics in the belt around Africa and India, Bangladesh, and it's between 60 and 80% lethal in the pockets where it comes out. It's not very transmissible like Ebola, so it kills 100 or 200 people and then burns out. But if they made it airborne, it would be different.
Okay, so this is a virus that occurs in nature, but you just detected it in this database, okay.
I detected cloning vectors with it, so they're manipulating it, which is not allowed by biological treaties.
So that's a pretty scary scenario right there, that the Wuhan lab that might have been the originator of the coronavirus is fooling around with something far more deadly.
Yes.
And they're obviously mum's the word. Dr. Ebright, I'm a little confused. You talked about, well, if we were doing gain of function on the current coronavirus, that'd be okay. That's not the indication I'm getting from Dr. Esvelt here. And I think what really concerns me is, and I'm not saying that you're saying this justification, you're just saying that the reality situation is we've got research centers, we've got scientists that are doing this gain of function research for very dangerous gain of function research for 2 completely unnecessary reasons, because it's fundable and it's publishable. And I would call those, again, so you got a little greed involved and you have hubris. Is that what you're saying?
The research is performed because it's fast, easy, fundable, and publishable. In the academic research ecosystem, those are determinants of what research gets pursued.
So I view that as a very corrupt research ecosystem. I mean, if that is what is driving research, and very dangerous research, it's so that you can get a funding grant just to do something, I guess, for grins, and then you can publish it and get the academic kudos for it. Man, I'm sorry, I just find that sick.
I would not use the term corrupt. I would not see any real difference between this than the activity of a hedge fund or the activity of a bank or a broker. The key point is that because of these incentives, self-regulation from within the community is insufficient. The scientific research community will follow the incentives. It will never effectively self-regulate on these issues. For this reason, we have regulations with force of law for vertebrate animals research and for human subjects research. We need regulations with force of law for gain of function research of concern.
Well, I think the difference, if it's a bank or hedge fund, I mean, they're doing things for an economic incentive to produce something, to fund a manufacturing site or fund some kind of business. Again, this is research that has, again, I'm not hearing the benefit of this research.
There's a benefit to the researcher.
And I'm seeing the risk, I'm seeing the danger. I'm not seeing the benefit other than what you're saying for the researcher itself to just get money, to do something that's dangerous, and to have the academic kudos for being published. I don't know, I maybe you don't like the word corrupt, it's completely useless. It has no benefit to society, it just has risk, just has danger. I have no further, Dr. Esvelt, I mean, do you disagree with that assessment?
I think that all institutions follow their incentives. And I think that that set of incentives, fast, easy, fundable, and publishable, insofar as fundable and publishable are ways of curing heart disease and cancer and forestalling aging, those are all certainly fundable and publishable, perhaps not as fundable as we would like. Certainly research into defenses against the next pandemic is right now somewhat fundable. I wish it could be more fundable. But
those,
it's publishable. So right, it depends on
what you're talking about. Fundable and publishable have a beneficial reason. What I'm hearing from the three of you witnesses, there's just not a benefit to this.
There is one clarification. You mentioned on endemic human viruses like SARS-2, why do this? Well, if you want to predict the next variant that is going to arise anyway within a couple of months, one that already exists, then that's why researchers do things like deep mutational scanning of the spike protein to look and see which ones of them might have a bit of an edge in terms of maintaining infection while evading immunity a little bit and is likely to be the next variant. That then lets us design the next vaccine against the variant and guess correctly. We have to do this with flu every year. Flu vaccines are terrible usually because we often guess wrong. So that kind of research can help improve our guess as to what is correct. But as soon as you make a change that would not occur in nature, then it becomes dangerous because that is something that a more pathogenic mutation could be inserted. And that becomes a problem, and there's no justification for doing that because nature's not going to come up with it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Let's stop there and let's look at what was said there. Funding, because it's fundable and publishable. Hubris by scientists. All different scientists, institutions do this for funding. The funding they're talking about is our funding, our tax dollars. And this is what they're creating. I agree with Senator Johnson. This is sick. This is corrupt. And the comparison he gave us, this is not like a bank or any other institution. Consider the fact other institutions can cause hardships on the human race in their own different ways, financially or whatever scam they're pulling. And some are used to develop businesses that are useful. But this type of research can directly kill many members of the whole human race. And that's what we just saw take place. Now, what do you need to wake up and demand? And we're probably one of the few countries that still have the rights and the power from the people to stop this. If Congress doesn't do it for us, our elected representatives are responsible for this. Our executive branch is responsible for national security. They're supposed to protect us from this type of thing happening. It's an all risk, no benefit to society. And like Dr. Esvelt confirmed, nature does not act this way. And like I said, we've showed evidence of forensic studies, how it's never happened this way before. I mean, I've run them over. It hasn't happened over thousands of years. So, like you said, if you are trying to fight something that exists, maybe this research is beneficial. But to create something that does not exist is dangerous. Let's move on to Senator Marshall.
Thank you again to our witnesses for hanging in there with us. I want to start by going back to a comment that Dr. Esvelt made, that USAID paid for gain-of-function research in China. And most people don't realize that because USAID won't give us the records. And we've been trying for over a year to get those records, which is why we're holding up one of their nominees as well. So thank you for pointing that out, Dr. Esvelt. I'm going to go to Dr. Ebright next and talk a little bit more about EcoHealth Alliance, about their record of non-compliance. They couldn't provide research records to NIH when NIH requested them. They didn't have an adequate agreement with WIB. They don't use the appropriate rate of pay for WIB researchers. There continue to be non-compliance with financial conflicts of interest policies. Dr. Ebright, based upon EcoHealth Alliance's record of non-compliance, should they continue to be eligible to receive federal funds?
Their most important aspect of non-compliance was that they were informed by the NIH in terms and conditions on the notice of award for their grant that in the event they encountered viral growth in their engineered coronaviruses that exceeded the growth of the parent coronaviruses by more than a factor of 10, they must immediately inform NIH and immediately stop the research. They did not do this. So that's not merely a financial violation. That is a serious hazard violation and a violation that may be connected to the origins of the current pandemic. With that being said, it is inexplicable that they were awarded subsequent federal awards and that they remain eligible to receive federal awards.
Wow. I need to submit for the record, thank you for the answer, a couple articles. First, I quoted Dr. Fauci. This is an article from Science, July 2012, a handsome young Dr. Fauci, so I want to submit that for the record. And my next two questions, I want to submit something from the Wall Street Journal, a couple articles as well, regarding genomic sequences.
Without objection.
So we'll go to Dr. Quay next. You may be familiar with the genomic sequences in NIH's database. I think you spoke about them. That Chinese scientists asked to be removed and how they were from early COVID Wuhan patients. Do you believe there could have been more data in NIH's database submitted by Chinese scientists that could hold the key to the COVID-19 origins?
Yeah, this was a really nice piece of work by Jesse Bloom at the University of Washington, who found not in the NIH database, but on some Amazon web servers, the actual sequences of viruses from very early patients that had been put on gene bank and then removed before they were published and made available. And the remarkable thing is, again, going to another piece of good research, the virus that first came out, the first Wuhan virus, is 3 mutations away from what we now know is probably the first virus, but that's a computational method. It's kind of complicated, but anyway, there's a prediction. There are 3 mutations that have never been seen in humans before the first virus that we have in humans. The specimens Jesse found had some of those. So we know that the Chinese have viral sequences that are ancestral to what we have, and the more of those we get, the more we'll get to the bottom of this. I'll point out that these sequences were from September and October of 2019, 2 months before any person in the market was sick. So again, the timing of the market spillover doesn't coincide with the genetics of the virus.
Dr. Esvelt, anything to add to that?
No, other than Jesse is certainly one of the foremost experts in this field, and if you want probably some of the best answers that science can give, then I would recommend that you request his input.
Thank you. My last question. For 20 years, NIH-sponsored EcoHealth's partnership with scientists from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The Chinese scientists have bragged that their virus sample database is the largest in the world. They took that database offline in September 2019. NIH asked EcoHealth for research records. EcoHealth told them that the records are in the custody of the Chinese government. Is it possible that the database taken offline by the Chinese government was data collected by EcoHealth and belongs to American taxpayers?
Make sure that was speech.
And Dr. Quay?
Well, since the work has been funded in part by U.S. taxpayers, then by definition, access to that would be important. And I also think that we don't have to rely on the Wound Institute of Virology from releasing that. I believe within the U.S. jurisdiction, there will be copies of that database. It's too valuable not to have in your own possession if you're doing research on it.
Do you think there's any way we can still get any of that data that's missing? I feel like, somewhere we're going to find the grandfather of COVID or a cousin or something here in these data banks. Why did they take them down? And what would be the advantage of them taking it down? Do you think we can ever find what we're missing?
Well, it was taken down at 2 a.m. on September 12th, 2019, which is, I guess everyone works hard, but that's a little suspicious to be doing it at that point in time. I believe it contains closer precursors, and my hypothesis is it contains the one that's 50 mutations or 100 mutations, not 1,200 away, and it was too obviously a smoking gun. But again, if you're collaborating on that and you're spending 10 years building a database inside the Wound Institute of Virology, you're going to mirror that database in your own facilities, which means that it's got to be at EcoHealth Alliance somewhere.
Thank you. Dr. Esvelt, anything to add?
Just note that I agree with Dr. Ebright's assessment from earlier. To the extent that China is doing this research, it's because it is scientifically sexy and glamorous and is fast, easy, publishable, etc. Okay. Chinese scientists have the same incentives as Western scientists in this regard. And I do not think, in fact, it's very clear that this research is not in China's strategic interest. China has no more interest than we do in handing out the blueprints to agents that can kill millions of people, including their people. This is not in the interest of any established, powerful nation. And the question is, can we show leadership and persuade them of that? Because as long as we're doing it, we are making it, we're contributing to the fact that this is seen as glamorous research. It gets published in our top-tier journals. Many Chinese scientists get bonuses for publishing in our top-tier journals. We are driving these incentives because we persist in seeing this, again, as a health and safety issue rather than a national security issue. So I think it is in our power to change it, and I think this is one issue where our interests are actually aligned with those of China and really indeed every other established nation. These are asymmetric tools of mass death.
Okay. Dr. Ebright, anything we didn't ask you that we should have?
That I don't know, but I just wanted to agree completely with the last remark by Dr. Esvelt.
Okay. Thank you, and I yield back.
All right, let's look at that. They will not release the information to Congress. They had to fight to get the information they have. Again, it goes back to this. Everything that's happening is a complete contradiction to our form of government. And think about this. They saw the hazard and recognized it and did not report it. They had to find the documents on an Amazon web bank site. The research was done just prior to the spread of the virus worldwide. So what we do know is EcoHealth Alliance has to have that, because like the doctor said, if you're doing this type of research, you're going to turn around and put the data and make copies of it and store it yourself. And they were bound to report this to qualify for funding too. Mutations like this have never been seen in humans before. But they were even storing records in the Communist Chinese government. Our enemies. They told us they're our enemies. That's treason. Why would you do something like that? Especially with something this dangerous. Why didn't EcoHealth Alliance turn over what they have mirrored in their website again? No. Considering what they did for the funding. It's like, if you can't see something's really wrong here and needs to be addressed immediately, and then just take it and weigh it to what you see happening today. And why all of a sudden all this is happening, you really have to sit here and demand you want accountability. But let's listen to Rand's closing statements here.
I want to thank everybody for being part of this hearing. I don't see this as the end. I see this as the beginning of trying to understand what caused the pandemic and trying to come up with solutions. Each of your statements, which is longer than your testimony, will be available for anybody who's interested. I wanted to point out one thing from Dr. Ebright's testimony, just for those who say, well, lab leaks should be discounted, they don't ever happen. At one point, Dr. Ebright writes, the second, third, fourth, and fifth entries of the SARS virus, this was the first one, into human populations occurred as a laboratory accident in Singapore in 2003, a laboratory accident in Taipei in 2003, and two separate laboratory accidents in Beijing in 2004. So for people who say that it's a conspiracy theory that this could have come from the lab, they're discounting our history. The history has had these lab leaks, and so whether or not we'll ever know for 100% certain whether this came from the lab, we have had lab leaks, and we have to realize the potential danger of these pathogens. We didn't get a great deal of time into the answer. We got a little bit into the answer, but each of the scientists we asked today were asked to let us know how we could better supervise or oversee this kind of research. The interesting thing to me is I think they all worked independently, but they came up with basically very similar solutions. An independent body outside of the funding organizations or those receiving the funding to make the recommendations. Something akin to an independent agency like a nuclear regulatory agency. In fact, I've already been using the analogy when people ask me and say, well, what's this like? And it's essentially, we don't let anybody sell centrifuges to Russia or centrifuges to Iran. There are rules on the export of things. And I think Dr. Esvelt in particular has talked about the security aspect of this. What I would really like to come of this, and I mean this sincerely, is I would like to have a bipartisan bill that comes forward for better oversight. Maybe it's not oversight of gain of function, but maybe includes things that some people consider to be gain of function. Maybe it's more general of pandemic viruses. There's a lot of ways we can discuss it, but the bottom line is I don't think the people doing the research are able to adequately and objectively regulate themselves. And I think having 1 million people die, there should be bipartisan curiosity in this, that we should be able to move forward. So my hope is that your suggestions that you've taken the time to put in writing, you've taken the time out of your busy careers to come here, that these suggestions will become legislation. If we can get a bipartisan bill to come forward, what I'd like is that our people who help us write the legislation can communicate with the 3 scientists here. We're willing to hear from a dozen more scientists. Anybody who wants to. I want scientists to be involved in this. But I do think that ultimately the people making the judgment shouldn't be from one small field of science. So some have said, well, none of the 3 scientists there are virologists. Well, I don't have a problem with virologists being part of this, but I do have a problem with them all being virologists. The same way I have the problem with behavioral science being approved for funding by all behavioral scientists. I think that there need to be people who understand science on this, but I think there also need to be people on the committee, as Dr. Esvelt has mentioned, that understand bioterrorism and biosecurity. And I think it should be a mixture. I mean, this is something we can talk to the scientific community. And I don't think an absolute ban is what we want. We want is a better oversight of this. But we can't have something where 3 projects have been looked at in the last 7 years. I mean, that means they're not looking. And the fact that they didn't look at what went on in Wuhan, and then some of the folks I asked in committee about this were saying, oh, our scientists looked at it and approved it. Even that's not really true. They didn't look at the research. They just ignored the research. It didn't go before the committee. They haven't been honest. But if we want trust in public health and trust in government and trust in science and trust in research and trust in the NIH and trust in the grants that we give to our universities, billions of dollars, we need to have transparency and honesty. We can't have a committee where the people are cloaked in secret. I mean, what is this? I mean, this is completely insane. So I think we've made some progress. I want to move forward, and I, for one, am open to work with any Democrat in the Senate to make this a bipartisan bill and to make it an even-keeled thing where all the voices are heard, that we don't rashly create any legislation that would hamper science, but that we create something that would have oversight that might save lives. I truly think that 1 million people died in our country, 6 million people died, and I think it was from a lab leak. And I think it's something that we need to have precautions against, because if this gets in, and I think it was accidental, by the way, I mean, no, but I think if we don't do anything, what if this gets in the hands of somebody who actually really wants to harm America or the world, or just some psychopath? What could happen? So right now we're doing nothing and have changed no behavior. We've had this pandemic and we have changed not one bit of behavior. So I think it's about time we do get together and that we're all curious, and that we don't make this about Republicans and Democrats. We make this about how we as a people come together to try to make this world a better place. Thank you all for appearing.
All right, let's just take a look at what Rand said there. I think he's trying to play like the reasonable congressman, because I disagree that this was accidental. And I think the psychopaths that want to harm us in the US and the human race, they're the ones who created it and are doing it. I mean, there's just too many events. Like he mentions, the accidents do happen, like in 2003 and 2004. But they know what they're playing with. The CRISPR was developed right around then, and that made it feasible to be able to do this even more efficiently than before. When Fauci, like I said, was involved in AIDS research, the green monkey theory. Do you really believe that all this just came from a green monkey by accident? No, I don't think so. When you go to the timeline, going back to even George H. Bush as a representative in Congress, and the head of the Ways and Means Committee wanted to develop a virus that would resolve the population problem. And this is going back to 1969, to resolve the population problem in the third world countries. So he wants review. He's calling it bioterrorism. There's no community review. It's secret. He says oversight's required. But I don't think Rand is considering the urgency and all the events leading up to this. Like was mentioned, the event 201, October 2019. You know, and how our enemies declared war on us after we just discovered China's attacks on many things in the US. The bottom line is, Communist China had to remove Trump from power because they feared he would get to the bottom of all this. So with that being said, we're going to move to segment 3 with some comments from doctors that have been made and speaking out from the beginning about this. That should drive the point home of concern about Fauci's retirement. With that, we'll close and we'll move to part 3.